Sean was telling this story about how he was waiting in line to get the next new iPhone. Line wrapped around the building, was waiting in line for a good 4.5, 5 hours. As he's waiting, he notices three about college-age individuals. They come up and tap this man in front of him on the shoulder. They say, "Hey, do you know about Jesus? Have you heard about Jesus?" And the guy he turns away, just kind of blatantly ignores them. And then you could tell that the three individuals were discouraged. And right as they're about to walk away, Sean goes, "Hey, what is that?" They turn around and they say, "Yeah, do you know who Jesus is?" And Sean goes, "I don't even know if that guy really existed. You can't tell me you guys really believe that Christian stuff." And the three individuals, they go, "Yeah, actually we do. We know it's true because we have this Bible." And Sean goes, "Well, how do you know the Bible is true?" And the three people go, "Well, because it says it right here in 2 Timothy that all scripture is inspired by God." And Sean goes, "Wait. You can't turn to a passage within the book, assuming that passage is true, to prove that that book is true." And the people go, you could tell they were a little bit discouraged and flustered. Good point. And right as they're about to walk away again, Sean goes, "Wait, guys, I have a confession. I'm actually a Christian, and good on you for you guys taking your Saturday and sharing your faith. But if you're going around and telling people to bet their life on this book, you better have some good reasons for it." And that's exactly what we're going to get into today. Tests for the historical reliability of the Bible. By the way, guys, my name is Daniel Wilson. Welcome to Faith and Fit. I'm a Christian, lived with an atheist for a year, had no idea how to defend my faith, and I don't want you to be one of those Christians. Let's get into it. When talking about the historical reliability of the Bible, I think it's important that we talk a little bit about how books were written back in ancient times. So when we think of writing, we think of basically typing on a laptop. And in order to appreciate the sheer magnitude of how many manuscripts that we have in our possession today, I think it's important to understand how they wrote books. So basically, a manuscript is a handwritten book, and it was handwritten on a piece of material called papyrus. Papyrus was the most common form of writing material up until about the 6th or 7th century for classical literature. And the thing about papyrus is it wasn't very durable, so it would degrade over time. And that's why we don't have any original autographs of the manuscripts from back then. And actually, fun fact, it was they would take large shipments and distribute it through the Syrian port of Byblos, which is where we get our Greek word for book. And actually, papyrus is where we get our Greek word for paper. But that was the writing material that they used in ancient times. So it would degrade over time, so which is why we don't have any original autographs, but they were handwritten copies. So think of the book, it was handwritten. That's how important it was for people to preserve, for people to preserve these writings. So now let's move on to the bibliographical test. We'll explain a little bit about what that is here in just a second. So the bibliographical test. And this test is to determine the historical reliability and accuracy of any book from antiquity, which just means an ancient book. This doesn't just go for the Bible. This goes for any piece of classical literature. And basically what it is measuring is, when was the book, the original manuscript, the original autograph written, and when is the oldest existing manuscript that we have available today in our possession. And also, it also measures the amount of manuscripts for the piece of literature. So basically, this took me a little while to get, so maybe a pictogram will kind of help. So if book in question was written on this day, how far do you go into the future before you get an existing copy? Because remember, most of the books were written on papyrus, and it was not very durable, so they would disintegrate over time. And basically what we're measuring is the textual transmission. Did anything get added? Did anything get left out? Were there any errors? Were there any forgeries over the period, or over the years? And obviously, the less time gap that you have between the original autograph and the existing manuscript, probably the more accurate it's going to be. So the more time that we go out into the future, the less accurate it is. And also with the amount of manuscripts that we have. So the more manuscripts, existing manuscripts, the more that we can actually reconstruct the the writings and basically determine what, with a pretty good accuracy, what the original autograph probably looked like. So let's see how the Bible stacks up next to other pieces of classical literature when using the bibliographical test. So when examining the bibliographic test, we're examining when the original autograph was composed and what is the oldest existing manuscript that we actually have in our possession. And in addition to that, we're examining the amount of manuscripts that we have in our possession. The more manuscripts, the better. The less time gap between the original autograph and the one that we have, the one that's currently existing, the better. So we're going to take a look at some classical writings, and then after that, we'll see how the Bible stacks up to these classical writings. First off, we're looking at Julius Caesar. So we have, he was a Roman general. He was a statesman. In Caesar's Gallic Wars, it was composed between 58 and 50 BC. The oldest manuscript we have is around the 9th century. And we have around 251 manuscripts that are existing today. And that puts the oldest manuscript around 900 years old. Moving on to Plato. Plato, he was a philosopher. He was born in the 5th century. They say his writings probed the meaning of truth, goodness, and beauty. And some say that all philosophy is a footnote of Plato. We have his tetralogies. It was composed between 427 and 347 BC. The oldest existing manuscript that we have is in 895 AD. So there are 237 manuscripts that we have today, and that puts the oldest existing manuscript between when it was originally autographed to what we have today, 1,300 years. Right? Moving on, Tacitus. Tacitus was his life was shortly after Jesus. He was a Roman orator. He was a public official. He was one of the great Roman historians, and in his Annals, which was composed around 56 to 120 AD, the oldest manuscript that we have is 850 AD. That's the current existing one that we have in our possession. There are a total of 36 manuscripts from Tacitus' Annals, and that puts the time between the original autograph and the current one that we have in our possession 700 years. Right? So moving on to Pliny the Elder, he was a Roman scholar, naval commander. He was his monumental encyclopedia was considered the scientific authority up to the Middle Ages. So if we look at his writings, it was composed, which was natural history, composed between 2479 AD. The oldest existing manuscript that we have is it was composed in the 5th century, and there are a total of 200 manuscripts from Pliny the Elder, and from the original autograph to the one that we currently have was 500 years. Right? So keep that in mind. We're going to look at how the Bible and some of the manuscripts that we have from the Bible stack up to the classical writings. Okay, now moving on to the Bible and the New Testament manuscripts, seeing how they stack up with the bibliographic text. Remember, we're measuring the date from the original autograph to the current existing copy, and we're also measuring the amount of manuscripts that we have in our possession today. So the Gospels, depending on which historian you ask, is going to be dated anywhere between 60 AD to 90 AD. Okay, and if you look at the oldest existing manuscript that we have in our possession, it's called the John Rylands manuscript, also known as P52. It's located in the John Rylands Library in Manchester, and it is the oldest existing copy that we have of the New Testament manuscript. It was composed in 130 AD. That puts it between when the original autograph of John was composed and the existing copy that we have today, between 40 years, which is unprecedented when talking about books of this age. Moving on, we are talking about the Bodmer Papyrus. So the Bodmer Papyrus, it was purchased in the 1950s from a dealer in Egypt, and it's located in the Bodmer Papyrus Library of World Literature. And it was believed to be composed between 150 and 200 AD. That puts it between the time that the gospel was written and the existing copy that we have of this particular writing, 80 years, right? Again, that's unprecedented. Moving on, we're talking about the diatessaron. It was an early harmony of the Gospels, and it was produced in Syria, and between the time of the Gospels and, first, the diatessaron was composed in 170 AD. From the time of the Gospels to the diatessaron, that's about 100 years, which may sound like a lot, but compared to the other classical writings, it's, again, unprecedented. Now, the Chester Beatty Papyra, can't pronounce that, Chester Beatty Papyra. This was purchased in the 1950s, also from a dealer in Egypt, and it was believed to have been composed in 200 AD, so the time the gospel was written between this particular manuscript is about 130 years. Again, that's unprecedented. And there's about, the Bible is translated in over 9 different languages. And if you're looking at just the New Testament Greek manuscripts, 5,856 New Testament Greek manuscripts, right? We're talking about early translations. There's over 18,130 early translations. And Old Testament scrolls, there's over 42,300 Old Testament scrolls. And the total biblical manuscripts that we have in our possession today, 66,286 manuscripts. To put that in perspective, I drew up a little graph. So if you're looking at the classical writings, if you stacked it up into a building, it would equal the classical writings, it would equal about 4 feet high as far as the number of manuscripts. The World Trade Center is 1,792 feet tall. If you just stacked up the New Testament manuscripts, it would equal 1 mile. All right? If you just stacked up the Old Testament manuscripts, it would equal 1.5 miles. Now, if you put it all together, all of the biblical evidence that we have, the biblical manuscripts, it would equal 2.5 miles high. That's evidence for the Bible than we do any other piece of ancient literature in the world. Now, Sean does make a note to have a little bit of caution when comparing classical notes to the Bible, basically because most classical works were in a region that could, they were preserved. They were written on papyrus, but they were in a region where they could actually be preserved. And from that point, they were recopied in Egypt, and they were systematically copied and then studied at the library in Alexandria, which partially burned in the 1st century BC. And then the texts were also systematically destroyed by Christians in the 4th century. And then after that, they were systematically destroyed by the Muslims in the 7th and 8th century. So in part, Christians are to blame for destroying over 1 million copies of classical writings. So with that being said, there is one thing I forgot to mention. Aside from the New Testament manuscripts that we have from the early church fathers, we have over 36,389 scripture citations from the early church fathers. So aside from the New Testament manuscripts, we have over 36,389 scripture citations from the early church fathers. All in all, ton of evidence that the Bible was transmitted from original autograph to the manuscripts that we have today. It's accurate, it's reliable. There is no other piece of ancient literature that even compares with the amount of evidence that we have for the Bible. And that's just one reason that we can trust that it is true and reliable. Next week, we're going to talk about a different test. But with that being said, I want to start doing this at the end of the videos. If you made it this far, one question I have for you is, how many total biblical manuscripts do we have in our possession today? A, 43,000, B, 33,000, C, 20,000, or D, 66,286? The answer is D, 66,286. Comment down below if you got it right. Don't be afraid to hit that like button, comment. Till next time, look forward to seeing you next week.